Well, howdy there, partners. Welcome back, everyone. That's kind of Western talk. It's not really in keeping with the theme of this video. You see, the theme of this video, if you can tell from the title and the thumbnail and all that other stuff, is the best-selling American novel from the year 1904. Just a quick note, if you haven't seen my other videos on this topic, that is determined by the Publishers Weekly bestseller list. That is the oldest, going back through the years, list that I could find. This novel is a definite American novel written by an American author about the United States and how it came to be in its present form. It picks up after the Revolutionary War and covers some of the events right after it, like before the War of 1812, and actually just before the Louisiana Purchase. I'm not real up on my American history, but I kind of know the basics. This is a historical fiction novel, so no doubt that many of the events talked about in it are fairly accurate, but also heavily fictionalized. This was a very popular novel, and it was written by an author who has already been on this list. So, without further ado, the best-selling novel from the year 1904 in America was The Crossing by Winston Churchill. I usually have a little bit about the author and their life. However, since I already covered this author, I'll just give you a quick highlight reel. Winston Churchill, the author, born in St. Louis, Missouri, November 1871, died March 1947 in Winter Park, Florida, age 75. In between, he wrote a bunch of magazine articles, became managing editor of Cosmopolitan. Then he started writing books. He was very prolific and wrote a whole ton of books, most of them historical fiction. He often put his political ideas into his novels, as well as his ideas about people, which you can tell from reading any one of his books. I have the need to mention that, again, this was not that Winston Churchill. There were two. This one was more well-known at the time, as the other was a younger man and getting started with his political career. Later on, as the other became more popular, they became aware of each other's presence and kind of traded jokes back and forth about it. Okay, so, The Crossing, the book. Published in New York by the Macmillan Company in 1904, London Macmillan and Company Limited, with illustrations by Sidney Adamson and Lillian Bayliss. I want to say this is the first time I've seen a female illustrator in one of these books. Honestly, I didn't think any of these illustrations were any great shakes, but to each their own. The original work was copyright 1903 by Norwood Press. I guess that's what that means. My particular copy was loaned to Mount Holyoke College, South Mandel, and there's a spot here that shows that something was stuck above that, and I was wondering what on earth it could have been. Well, I found this A-Libris or whatever tucked within the pages, so luckily I didn't have to wonder about that for too long. There is also a library stamp card in it, date due. Stamps run from April to December of 1940. How cool is that? This follows the story of one David Ritchie. We meet him when he is a young lad raised by his father. His mother has passed on. His father was from England, I believe, and his mother was possibly some sort of nobility. He doesn't know his dad isn't much of a talker. Out there on the frontier, a stranger comes along, turns out to be no other than Daniel Boone. It's one of those stories where the character crosses paths with a lot of famous historical figures. There is trouble a-brewin', and the dad goes to fight for the country, and David gets passed along to relatives. The relatives aren't too keen to have him there, but they tolerate him. The dad, his uncle, is a royalist and ends up sneaking out in the middle of the night. David is left behind, and the soldiers come in, meet him, and he gets passed along again. He gets passed along a few times. He goes to his cousins. He gets along well with his cousin, who's about the same age. And the cousin's mom doesn't really have anything to do with her son. She's a fancy lady and likes her society life. More things happen. Davy decides to run away. He does cross paths with Andrew Jackson once as a boy. I think this was before this. I'm sorry. I'm certainly out of order. There are a lot of events that happen in the story. Gosh, so many things. He meets a frontier gal, Polly Ann, and her father, and joins them in their travels to Kentucky. He stays with Polly Ann a while. She marries and starts raising a family, and Davy is part of that family, kind of as an honorary younger brother to her. Davy has a lot more that happens in his life. While still young, he ends up being the drummer boy for Colonel Clark's regiment. Now, I did not know this part of American history. Apparently, Colonel Clark was the dude who wound up through different things, leading soldiers and fighting battles, and that's how Illinois and Indiana, and I believe Ohio, became states, was through his intervention. Davy was the steadfast drummer boy who was an example to all the grown soldiers. Davy goes back to Kentucky and lives with Polly Ann for a little while, but he has grown, and circumstances being what they are, he eventually goes and gets an education, opens a law practice in a little town in Kentucky, and through circumstances, I'm going to say that a lot, again, a lot happens in this book, I'm not going to remember it all, he ends up going down to New Orleans in pursuit of his cousin, the one who he had lived with and who had the fancy mom. Well, Davy has also crossed paths with the mom because she, being a royalist, has been kind of on the run with her lover, and her son has never been able to forgive her. Now, because Davy has crossed paths with the mom and he has seen how she is doing penance for her sins, basically, she's really, really sorry for everything she's done and how she's treated her son, but her son will not forgive her. So Davy goes after the son to try and reconcile them. However, there's also a political side to this because both the Spanish and the French want control of Louisiana. This all coincides with the French Revolution. Oh my gosh, there's a lot going on here. And really, I remember the New Orleans part of it best because that's towards the end of the book. It's the last couple hundred pages. This book is almost 600 pages long, what I go through for these videos. It was an engrossing enough book, but still almost 600 pages long, and I was trying to do it on a deadline, so that's why it's like, ooh, that was a lot. And also in those last couple hundred pages, Davy ends up falling in love. She is a French woman, and he inadvertently, first he has giant respect for her, then it turns to love, it's through a picture. When he finally meets the woman who has come to the States fleeing France because she is an aristocrat, is when his respect increases and he falls in love. And really, she is an amazing woman in so many ways. As ever, I like to read just a few excerpts from the book that I found interesting. Here we go. There was the occasional cute comment, and I just thought this was awesome. "And what would you like best to be when you grow up, Davy?" he asked. 6 feet, said I, so promptly that he laughed. So did I. I have seen many courses since, but none to equal that in the gorgeous dress of those who watched. There had been many, many more in former years, so I heard people say. This was the only sign that a war was in progress, the scanty number of gentry present, for all save the indifferent were gone to Charlestown or elsewhere. I recall it dimly, as a blaze of color passing, merrymaking, jesting, feasting, a rare contrast, I thought, to the sight I had beheld in Charlestown Bay but a while before. Yet so runs the world. Strife at one man's home, and peace and contentment at his neighbor's. Sorrow here, and rejoicing not a league away. This is when he first sees the lady who he has been longing for, and I just loved it. I had not heard the sound of voices, but Mrs. Temple turned, startled, and looked towards the house. I followed her glance, and suddenly I knew that my heart was beating. Aww. Of course he thinks she's so awesome that he has nothing to offer as follows. I had met Hélène de Saint-Gré at last. What a fool she must think me! As I hurried along the dark banquettes, this thought filled my brain for a time to the exclusion of all others, so strongly is vanity ingrained in us. After all, what did it matter what she thought? Madame la Vicomtesse d'Ivry-le-Tour? I had never shown, and it was rather late to begin. But I possessed, at least, average common sense, and I had given no proof even of this. This is the point where the French woman, Madame la Vicomtesse, is trying to convince his cousin, Mr. Temple, to reunite with his mother, and she does quite a good job of it. It is her heart, Mr. Temple, that we fear the most. Last night I thought the end had come. It cannot be very far away now. Sorrow and remorse have killed her, monsieur. The one thing that she has prayed for through the long nights is that she might see you once again and obtain your forgiveness. God himself does not withhold forgiveness, Mr. Temple, said the Vicomtesse gently. Shall any of us presume to? A spasm of pain crossed his face, and then his expression hardened. I might have been a useful man, he said. She ruined my life, and you will allow her to ruin the rest of it? Asked the Vicomtesse. He stared at her. If you do not go to her and forgive her, you will remember it until you die, she said. Towards the end, there's another bit that just... I think it's well put, and I think there are some things that are good for any generation to take something from. At evening, when the March wind had torn the cotton clouds to shreds, we stood on the Mississippi's bank, gazing at the western shore at Louisiana. The low, forest-clad hills made a black band against the sky, and above the band hung the sun, a red ball. He was setting, and man might look upon his face without fear. The sight of the waters of that river stirred me to think of many things. What had God in store for the vast land out of which the waters flowed? Had he, indeed, saved it for a people to be drawn from all nations, from all classes? Was the principle of the Republic to prevail and spread and change the complexion of the world? Or were the lusts of greed and power to increase, until in the end they had swallowed the leaven? Who could say? What man of those who, soberly, had put his hand to the paper which declared the opportunities of generations to come, could measure the force which he had helped to set in motion? Interesting. So let me just read this part. Again, it's a little bit which you could relate to certain modern happenings. This book has been named The Crossing because I have tried to express in it the beginnings of that great movement across the mountains which swept restless over the continent until at last it saw the Pacific itself. The Crossing was the first instinctive reaching out of an infant nation which was one day to become a giant. No annals in the world's history are more wonderful than the story of the conquest of Kentucky and Tennessee by the pioneers. This name, The Crossing, is likewise typical in another sense. The political faith of our forefathers, of which the Constitution is the creed, was made to fit a more or less homogeneous body of people who proved that they knew the meaning of the word liberty. By liberty, our forefathers meant the duty as well as the right of man to govern himself. The Constitution amply attests the greatness of its authors, but it was a compromise. It was an attempt to satisfy 13 colonies, each of which clung tenaciously to its identity. It suited the 18th century conditions of a little English-speaking confederacy along the seaboard, far removed from the world's strife and jealousy. It scarcely contemplated that the harassed millions of Europe, and etc., would flock to its fold, and it did not foresee that, in less than 100 years, its own citizens would sweep across the 3,000 miles of forest and plain and mountain to the Western Ocean, absorb French and Spanish Louisiana, Spanish Texas, Mexico, and California, fill this land with broad farmsteads and populous cities, cover it with a network of railroads. Would the Constitution, made to meet the needs of the little confederacy of the seaboard, stretch over a continent and an empire? We are fighting out that question today. But the crossing was in Daniel Boone's time, in George Rogers Clark's. Would the Constitution stand the strain? And will it stand the strain now that the once remote haven of the oppressed has become a world power? It is a good story. Overall, it is well told and engrossing. And yes, 600 pages, but it's not so much of a slog, at least if you're not on a deadline. However, this novel was published in 1904, and especially if you've been following my videos so far, I think you can guess what the problem is. There are a lot of Black people characters in these books and a lot of Native American characters, all of them peripheral, because it is a white-centric novel. And the way they are described is less than complimentary. There's a lot of dialect, there's a lot of assumptions about their thought processes by the narrator. And this I found really interesting because the author, through the narration, kept saying over and over again about the white people too, like the French and the Spanish. And the author would attribute the way a person was talking or what they were doing to the way their thought processes worked or something like that. They would put it all down to race. They would say, in the manner of their race, or something of that nature. So this was common then. This was a very common idea that your race, your nationality, or your racialness itself affected who you are and how far you could go and who you could be and how your brain worked and all that stuff. And it's so wrong. It's incredibly dated, and oh my gosh, I am so glad that we have learned otherwise, and nobody thinks that anymore. Ha 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 ha. Okay, yes, that was sarcasm. Nobody should think that anymore because it's wrong. But some people do think that, and that's where we are today. So for that reason, it was a little hard to read because, yes, this has been a thing throughout most of the other books I've read thus far in this series. So these books were written by white people, and that was a very prevailing idea of the day. So yes, if you're going to have characters of color, particularly, then you're going to confront stuff like this. But it was really, really much in this novel. There was a lot of that. Okay, so anyway, long story short, this book is worth checking out. But just be aware that it is quite long. Like I say, really the last part, when the French woman arrived, was the part I really liked. It's where the bit of romance comes in, and I'm not a romantic, but she was just a wonderful character, and you could definitely see why he didn't think himself worthy of her. But it was an interesting experience as always, and I'm looking forward to reading the next book on the list, which will be the best-selling novel of 1905. I will not tell you what it is. You'll have to find out next time. I do hope you enjoyed coming with me on this journey. If not, I'll do something else next week. I always try and move these things around, shake them up, whatever you want to call it. And in the meantime, I hope you watch a lot of movies and read a lot of books, experience those stories. Talk to people, if that's your thing. I love people, I really do, and I love their stories. I'm just not good at talking to people. I also even talking in front of the camera to an audience. Again, I'm so sorry. Anyway, take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you next week. Bye.